This is an ice house? A misty sigh rose from Miss Lanez. What annoyed Frian even more was the look of pity the alchemist cast in her direction. Is that all you can see? Miss Lanez asked. Something to be used? Why not recognize it for what it is? It's cold. Dimir sneezed. Dimir had cast an Endure Elements enchantment on herself, so she shouldn't have been affected by the temperature. Frian couldn't help but agree with Dimir's sentiment, however, as their surroundings were caked in rime. The workshop was magically illuminated, but the magical light sources didn't emit heat and only served to make everything seem that much colder. Yeah, it's crazy cold. Miss Lanez said, but why do you think that is? Are you storing enough of that already? Why else would they freeze a warehouse? Temperature control items were obnoxiously abundant in the Sorceress Kingdom, so Frian's first thought was that they were now experimenting with cold storage. While ice houses were common in the Empire, they were completely mundane in their workings. If one wanted to preserve food using magical means, they would use a preservation item instead. There were some odd items from outside of the Empire like the magical fridges that sometimes appeared in our winter's markets, but their application didn't make much sense. It was like taking 2 steps to achieve a goal instead of 1, and she suspected that many of the magical appliances that appeared from beyond the Great Step only made it to the Empire because they were just plain idiotic and thus wouldn't sell wherever they were made. Well, there's supposedly an idea from that boastful sage, after all. Very few of his ideas make any sense. Frian examined the room as the alchemist awaited a satisfactory response. As far as equipment went, it was furnished similarly to the previous workshop. The workspaces were free of the ice that caked the walls, but a coating of frost still built up on anything that the alchemists working within weren't handling. That's actually a bit strange. Was it simply due to Warden's Vale being so humid and the workshop being so bitterly cold? Winters in our winter were dry and mild, so it was rare to see any ice and snow at all. It's those. Dimir pointed. In the center of the room, in a clearing on the floor, were a handful of small crystals. They were cordoned off by a set of ropes, but were otherwise left out in the open. It is those. Miss Lanez nodded. What are they? Dimir asked. Elemental ice. Elemental ice? Frian started, leaving it out like that is dangerous. Elemental ice needs to be stored in specialized containers. It was no wonder that the room was frozen. Did they not have basic safety procedures? This is the special container, Miss Lanez gestured to the workshop around them. But why would you do something like this? Frian asked. You've created a hazardous workspace. We've created the ideal workspace, the alchemist corrected her. If you wanted to work with elemental ice, you could have stored it in a small case and brought it out when you needed it. What you're doing here is reckless. Why? Why? The answer seemed abundantly obvious from the frozen surroundings. As I said, you've created a hazardous workspace. The floors are slippery and everything is covered in ice. You'll damage your equipment and injure your apprentices. That's a sacrifice we're willing to make, Miss Lanez shrugged. The equipment in this workshop is manufactured in Warden's Vale, so it's easily replaceable. And it isn't as if we don't make hundreds of potions a day next door. This is madness. It's clear that. Frian's frown deepened as she looked at the apprentices working at their benches. Unlike the disinterested expressions that their colleagues wore in the plain workshop, they wore the intense looks that she often saw on the faces of her fellows in the Imperial Ministry of Magic when they were conducting research. Then what is it that you're trying to accomplish here? Frian asked. Miss Lanez sent a look at Ludmilla, who nodded silently in return. First of all, the alchemist said, you've received a certain level of security clearance to be allowed in here, so I trust that anything we share with you will be treated as confidential. Of course, Frian replied. We have similar procedures at the Imperial Ministry of Magic. You work for the Imperial Ministry of Magic? I'm the new head court mage. A sense of satisfaction filled Frian as Miss Lanez stared at her blankly. At least until the alchemist spoke again. Oh. Anyway, in this workshop, we're attempting to prove certain elements, no pun intended, of something that we call unified mana theory. Through this theory, we hope to explain the true workings of the world. It was a very alchemist-like avenue of exploration. They always sought to prove one fundamental aspect of the world or the other, and their insatiable appetite for research funding was a constant headache for the ministry's budget. It was undoubtedly the same in Warden's Vale. The little pile of elemental ice on the floor was worth a small fortune. And what about this theory are you trying to prove here? Well, we're starting from nothing, the alchemist replied, so this workshop is trying to qualify the properties of ice mana. Ice mana. That's what we're calling it for now. Some people assert that it's a combination of water and air, but that doesn't explain the cold part of it. If you're talking about the elemental axis, Frian said, that's already a well-known concept. Well-known, Miss Lanez said, but not well explored. Those familiar with the elemental axis only accept it as a truth in itself. One that doesn't affect people's daily lives. And you propose that it does. The Faculty of Alchemy proposes that it is everything. Our cosmology. That the world and within it is the physical manifestation of its mana. Oh, and by mana we don't mean the mana used to cast spells, though it's likely related in some as yet unknown way. We're referring to the primal energies that govern all of existence. Primal mana, so to speak. I feel like you're starting from the middle of the explanation, Frian said. Could we get the background on this unified mana theory? I feel like we're barely at the beginning, but sure. To begin with, let's talk about souls. No, that's too complicated. It was beginning to feel like she was talking to the former head court mage. Those discussions never really got anywhere and most people simply assumed that his intellect and knowledge were simply beyond them. That didn't excuse the fact that nothing useful ever came out of his ramblings, however. Warden's Vale is the main inspiration for our exploration of unified mana theory, Miss Lanez said. It is, in essence, the perfect place for a colossal field study with its well-defined elemental gradients. One could say that it is similar to the Katsa Plains. Frian boggled at the comparison. How did the Katsa Plains compare in any way to the verdant cradle of life that was Ludmilla's domain? In what ways might that be? Frian asked. The last I checked, the Katsa Plains is a negative energy wasteland. If we use that same phrasing, Miss Lanez said, Warden's Vale is what you might call a positive energy wasteland. It's not something we can observe directly, but the results are quite drastic. Life abounds here. Certain primal spirits manifest at a much higher rate here than elsewhere. We had a dryad randomly pop up last year and there hasn't been a single miscarriage or stillbirth since the land was resettled, and that includes livestock. Also, the lake is filled with crabs. I'm getting sick of eating them every day. Didn't the crabs happen because they overfed the fish farms? Rangobart asked. Food is basically energy and materials. It doesn't mean anything without life itself. Things just grow here like crazy. We can only assume that the area is rich in positive energy or lacking in negative energy. I guess one thing would lead to the other. Is that why you wanted me to stay until I delivered the baby? Frian asked. Did I say that? Miss Lanez tilted her head. I did, Ludmilla said. And yes, that's the reason why. As far as we know, every mother here is guaranteed a healthy delivery. The abundance of positive energy is actually becoming a problem. I don't see how something so wondrous could be a problem. Because it affects all life, Ludmilla said. Disease, for instance, is a form of life that also benefits from these conditions. The residents are hardened against it, but most visitors who get sick can't recover naturally. We can use magic and potions to cure them, though. Also, Warden's Vale is as unnerving to the undead as the Katsa Plains is to the living. Only in the Sorceress Kingdom would one worry about how the undead felt. Does that mean you have problems with weeds? Dimier asked. Weed is a subjective term, Ludmilla answered. There are no weeds in Warden's Vale. Anyway, Miss Lanez said, though it sounds miraculous when I describe what happens here, the effects are subtle. Phenomena that manifest from long-term exposure are more noticeable, so the idea is that everything is being infused with the excess positive energy over time. At the same time, it's not so abundant that the undead just crumble to pieces by being around. How do these observations about positive energy relate to this workshop? Frian asked. The elemental gradients for ice are easier for us to study because we can observe fluctuations in the gradients as the seasons change. Additionally, Mount Verilyn provides an extreme point of reference for our studies. The ice gradient is so pronounced there that ice elementals start manifesting about a quarter of the way from the peak. Isn't that an extreme security risk? Rangobart asked. Ice elementals could come down and attack the harbor. That's a rather human-centric sentiment, Ludmilla answered coolly. Ice elementals do not specifically target human settlements. They attack anything that lies outside of their realm of the elemental axis. That includes most of the local animals and plants and the water elementals that dwell in the Katsa River. Besides, that sort of thing is predictable. By understanding elemental gradients, one also understands the expected range of elemental activity. Tribes that live close to transition zones have long learned how to do this, but you still run the risk of rogue elementals, Rangobard noted. The Imperial Army must respond to many such cases yearly. True rogue elementals are extraordinarily rare, Ludmilla said, otherwise, we'd have millions of Earth elementals coming up from their dwellings underground to attack people and our countries would be unlivable. What the Empire experiences is resistance to changes in existing elemental gradients. So you're saying that the elementals attacking our land developments is something we provoked? Yes. We should flatten more hills, Dimir said. If what they say is true, it would mean more Earth elementals to catch to make golems with. Just keep in mind that elemental gradients can be sculpted, Miss Lanez said. Thus, the capacity of elemental energy to react to change is limited. Elemental spirits only manifest at a certain threshold, so you're not going to be able to farm elementals unless you're sitting on a nexus of elemental energy. So that's why they stop appearing after our patrols deal with them a few times? Rangobard asked. Yup, the alchemist nodded. That land development effectively not only changes the physical appearance of the landscape, but also reshapes the primal energies that flow through it. Would the Ministry of Magic have made the same observations if they were better integrated with the Imperial administration? The observations presented were fairly basic. All that they required was for someone with suitable expertise to analyze the data and connect the dots. Countless security measures could be improved even with what little she had heard so far. Assuming that it was true, of course. I can see how this knowledge can be useful when it comes to the management of elemental threats, Frian said, but you mentioned that this unified mana theory applies to everything. How does it apply to less mystical creatures? Like humans? Miss Lanez said, well, it's actually easier for us to look at other races. Lady Zaradnik proposes that this in itself is a part of our nature. Humans have a cocktail of primal energy that they consider ideal, which appears to us as the environments that we're attracted to. As humans recognize threats far faster than anything else, it means that we can more easily recognize subjects that don't belong in the same realm. This even applies to other humanoids. When we look at, say, a mountain dwarf, we seem to instinctively recognize that they're more aligned to Earth by seeing the associated characteristics in them. They're more rugged, stoic, have greater resilience against certain effects and so on. They're even naturally talented at stonework. Researchers in the ministry often make willful interpretations of data to support their work, Frian noted. How do you ensure that you're not falling victim to any biases? That's what our research is all about. We're here to prove that it's a thing. How will you determine that you've discovered this proof? We are concocting potions with recipes that suggest that they're more ice-aligned than others, the alchemist said. We are also producing a few cold-related magic items. Control samples are made in other workshops. We hypothesize that favorable elemental gradients can lead to products of the same affinities having greater efficacy, much like how potions made from wild plants do. There are also several material studies to see if we can infuse various objects with natural elemental properties. And so you're trying to induce an elemental gradient by leaving some elemental ice on the floor. Plainly put, sure. Formally speaking, this is an experiment to test the elemental crucible hypothesis. Are there other elemental crucibles in the facility? Frian asked. This is the only one we figured out how to make work, Miss Lanez answered. I really want a fire crucible, but we need to figure out how to achieve fire immunity through magic items first. Also, the Sorceress Kingdom has two natural crucibles. Warden's Veil is a crucible of life, while the Katsa Plains is a crucible of death. And that's why you consider the two similar? Yup. Seeing the world through a different lens has provided some pretty interesting insights. Stuff that never made sense suddenly does, and the stuff that one was brought up to believe is right turns out to be backwards or just plain wrong. Then, there are all of the things that one suddenly notices that have been there all along. I admit that I'm curious about where this experiment might lead, Frian said. How long will it run for? A few decades, ideally. Decades? Any experiment that took decades would be dismissed out of hand as an unreasonable expense of less than dubious worth by the Empire. She supposed that a government run by immortal beings would be far more receptive to such proposals. Speaking of which, I don't see any elder lichens in this room, Freyan noted. Would they not be ideal for this type of research? They are an additional variable that we don't want to introduce, Miss Lanez said. There's another campus in the Katza Plains that they're even better suited for, as well. Ever since the Sorcerer's Kingdom announced that they had taken the Katza Plains, rumors abounded about what was going on in the mist-shrouded wasteland. If word got out about Cabals conducting secret research there, she couldn't imagine what would happen. Anyway, Miss Lanez said, the next workshop will probably be more to your tastes. What is it? One of the artificing workshops. Everyone loves magic items, right? Yay, magic items. With a gleeful cheer, Demaria left the workshop with Miss Lanez. The aforementioned workshop was right across the corridor and a dozen grey-robed apprentices were toiling within. The serious atmosphere surrounding their guide dissipated as she gestured to the interior. This here's the workshop for the temperature-regulating item that you've probably felt in just about every building and carriage in Warden's Vale. As with the plain alchemy workshop, the apprentices looked quite unenthused. That wasn't to say they weren't working hard. Magical item production required complete focus on the part of the enchanter. To those not involved in the process, however, it didn't look like they were doing much at all. The item itself looked like a strip of black iron that a cooper might use. They look like barrel hoops, Demaria said. They are masterwork barrel hoops, Miss Lanez corrected her. That's the basic requirement for a magic item, right? That the base item is of masterwork quality. But why a barrel hoop? The alchemist's head turned to Ludmilla. When we were still prototyping the item, Ludmilla said, Miss Lanez asked for easy-to-produce masterwork items that she could experiment on. I went to Smith Kovalev and he was making barrel hoops at the time. They called them heating hoops back then, Miss Lanez snickered. The villagers didn't understand how they worked at all, so they equated it to a little magical fire somehow. Some people tried to cook with theirs by putting a pot inside their hoop. Others put the hoops in their stoves thinking it would light their furniture on fire. You can stick the darn things anywhere, though. It doesn't even need to be in a hoop. It was no wonder that she could never figure out what was regulating the temperature in their rooms and carriages. In the Empire, magic items were a prestige symbol, so even temperature-regulating items served as display pieces. The barrel hoops, on the other hand, could be hidden almost anywhere. It didn't take my people long to get used to them, Ludmilla said. And they can adapt to anything new these days. Which is disappointing. Entertainment is a precious commodity here. I'd like to revisit a point that you mentioned earlier today, Freyan said. These apprentices look like they're working just as they would in the Empire. How does your system differ from the conventional guild system, if so? Enchanting magic items could take days, weeks, or even months. The apprentices wouldn't have time for anything else if that was the case. Education here is divided in curriculum and practicum, Ludmilla said. Similar to what you saw in Corlin Harbor, we've incorporated elements from the classroom-based system that Director Alpha proposed in the existing guild system to fashion a public education system run by the government. The practicum here strikes a balance between the things that one's mana is used for. Students have a contractual obligation to use 1/3 of their monthly mana for company work, Miss Lanez said. They get their share of the profits for that, of course. The rest may be used at their discretion, but I think most new apprentices put almost all of their mana into their work. Why is that? Freyan asked. Training, Miss Lanez shrugged. We are mainly followers of the Six here, after all. Apprentices take work orders that give them a suitable challenge and keep filling it until it isn't anymore. Then they find the next challenging work order and do that one. Then what's with all of the board looks? Demaria asked. The problem is material procurement for magic items. Our most advanced apprentices are trying to come up with new formulas using locally sourced materials, but, until we figure those out, we're reliant on imports. Since Shrouds of Sleep are produced by the Faculty of Necromancy, the next step up from heating hoop for us would be preservation items and magical lighting, except we were sort of sucking the region dry of reagents. Freyan nodded knowingly, then stopped. Wait a minute. The Empire is experiencing an extreme shortage of low-grade rubies, she said. Is that your doing? Probably. Frianne was shocked to find out about the shortage upon assuming her post as the head court mage and bringing herself up to speed on everything. No one ever expected the relatively cheap and abundant gemstones to dry up like that. It was akin to opening a granary, only to find out that it had been emptied by rodents. It seems that the Sorceress Kingdom will be plunging the Empire into darkness, after all, Frianne muttered. How terrible, Miss Lanez yawned. Would you like to buy some magical lighting at a perfectly reasonable price? How bad is the situation? Ludmilla asked. We rely on merchants to import goods and they send things our way so long as they can make a profit. I sent a memorandum to the mining interests around the country, Frianne said, but it will only mitigate the problem somewhat. After inquiring with a few merchants, I discovered that we'll see low-grade rubies priced as highly as high-grade rubies by the end of the year. I take that back, Miss Lanez said. Lady Zaradnik, as your business consultant, I recommend that we freeze all exports related to the imperial shortages until the end of the year. We're not reliant on export revenues to survive, so this is an incredible opportunity. I'm glad that our magic items don't use food as reagents. Last Zaradnik shook her head. We may have induced a famine. I suppose this is as good a test as any. Frianne's eyelid twitched at Ludmilla's ominous words. Test? Oh, we're not testing the Empire. Well, we might be, but that's not what I was referring to. I was talking about a system that was implemented recently as a result of profit-seeking behavior. You saw a bit of it earlier with Miss Grant's migrants. You mean where the vampire dominated those women? Frianne asked. Yes, Ludmilla answered with a nod. Goods like the heating hoop used to be sold at cost in our outlets in an effort to give the citizens access to affordable magic items. A certain merchant caught wind of that and started buying out shipments to resell in our winter. Did they use the profits to drain the Empire of rubies so you could make more magic items for them to buy? Dimir asked. Ludmilla gave Dimir a long, unreadable stare. Dimir scurried behind Rangobart. Why am I the expendable one? Rangobart asked. Get pregnant and I'll reconsider. Dimir answered. Why are you about to eat me after I said that, anyway? It makes perfect logical sense. Only to a merchant who cannot see beyond simple-minded profit motives, Ludmilla replied. The point was that a program was put in motion to improve our citizens' quality of life with magic items. Making it seem like reagents were abundant and easily procured hides the fact that the program was unsustainable at the rate that it was being carried out. Not only did those activities obscure that critical fact, but it hurt our client state in the process. At least the Empire won't collapse if magical lighting gets expensive for a few years, Frianne offered. Which is why I said we were lucky it wasn't food, Ludmilla sighed. Trade can certainly be convenient, but it also puts distance between the source of any given thing and its purchaser. If a contract is offered, one assumes that supply exists. The merchant tasked with fulfilling that contract will endeavor to fulfill their contract in the most profitable manner. The fact that procurement can involve a long chain of merchants makes it even harder to keep track of. Why does that matter? Dimir asked. You still got what you needed faster than you would otherwise have, right? Because I must now consider if the rubies that I purchased are stained in the blood of a child slave worked to death in some dark, distant mine because I inadvertently drove the price of rubies up in my desire to improve our citizens' quality of life and their taskmasters decided that a few dead children was worth the profit. The Sorceress Kingdom has expressed a desire to develop mutually beneficial relationships with those who choose to amicably interact with us. Becoming a parasitic existence that spreads suffering throughout the world runs counter to His Majesty's mandates. But if it comes down to the well-being of your people versus the well-being of outsiders, Rangobart said, as a noble, would you not choose your own subjects? I would if it was a matter of survival, Ludmilla said, but it's not. The lives of our citizens have only ever improved since the annexation of Irantal and they are solidly on their way to getting better. To trample lives simply because one wants to make an already luxurious life slightly more so a little bit faster is an unquestionably evil act. At least from a human perspective, a red dragon would likely say the opposite. Does that stance hold true for the Sorceress Kingdom's expectations of the Empire, as well? Frianne asked. Those are my personal views, Ludmilla answered. And they reflect how I've decided to rule. The Sorceress Kingdom's approval or disapproval of each of the Empire's actions is something that the Empire will have to find out on its own. Not that we would ever want to. Her cousin would probably faint on the spot if he received a missive indicating any kind of disapproval from the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Even completely normal communiques from their suzerain could make him double over with stomach pains. "Master." A voice sounded from behind them. A brown-robed apprentice appeared in the doorway. "Did you leave the door to the ice house open again?" he said in an exasperated voice. "There's frost everywhere." "Ah, my bad," Miss Lanez said. "Ice house?" Frian frowned at the apprentice. "The workshop across the corridor," the apprentice explained. "It reminds everyone of an ice house, so we ended up calling it that." Frian's head whipped around to look at Miss Lanez. Miss Lanez looked away. "Master Lanez," Frian smiled, "may I fireball you just once? I promise it will hurt." "Perhaps we should have started from the beginning," Frian sighed. "I know that it is a lot to take in," Ludmilla said. "Is there anything in particular I can help you understand?" Master Lanez is a bit enthusiastic. "Perhaps. She reminds me of the researchers in the Imperial Ministry of Magic." "Is that a good thing, or a bad thing?" "In my experience," Frian replied, "more bad than good. It may be that she's genuine about her research, but I'm afraid she'll betray your expectations." That was how it usually went in the Ministry of Magic. Project proposals weren't approved haphazardly, yet 19 out of 20 ended up going nowhere. It was accepted as the reality of magical research within the ministry, but it always drew the wrong sort of scrutiny from the court council. "And here I thought it was supposed to be that way," Ludmilla said. "That's what everybody in the Empire thinks," Frian sighed once more. "It's a stereotype that I'm trying to correct." "Does it need correction?" Ludmilla asked. "I'm of the mind that people should be passionate about what they do." "When it comes to magic," Frian said, "passion results in wasted effort. Magical research isn't as simple or intuitive as mundane crafts. If left to their own devices, mages can conduct research until they expire from old age with no tangible results. That's what we're for, isn't it? Nobles exist to lead. We ensure that the efforts of our subjects don't go to waste. Getting all sorts of different people to work toward a collective goal is a matter of course. You have a very generous interpretation of our role. Is it wrong?" "Technically, it isn't," Frian said. "But we must draw a line in how accommodating we should be. Noble women, especially, must be wary of this as we are raised to play a supporting role in house affairs and are thus more easily exploited." This was something that she herself struggled with, and she suspected that most women, never mind noble women, did. Accustomed to women being flexible and accommodating in a world dominated by men, most assumed that they could walk all over her and wouldn't stop of their own accord. The problem was especially pronounced in arenas of political and financial power. "The realms of the arcane aren't well explored and what we do know is ill-defined," Frian said. "That makes it easy for mages to convince the uninitiated that they know what they are doing or that their theories have merit. Even with the guidance of Fluida Paradigm, the Empire's advances in magical fields have been painfully slow and expensive. Many nobles bemoan the fact that the resources poured into the Imperial Ministry of Magic could have instead been used to secure ties for the Empire. By investing in conventional industry and the Imperial Army." "That's right," Frian nodded. "The primary obstacle to the conquest of ties was insufficient forces for an occupation. We could have had 2 or 3 times the military might if we had focused on conventional means over the generations. Instead, well, I'm certain that you're well aware of our strength and our forays into the abyss of magic haven't gotten very far. Personally," Ludmilla said, "I find my current circumstances refreshing. Maybe it's a consequence of where we stand in life. The Empire has been in a relatively comfortable position for generations while House Saradnik has always been in a perilous one. All of our time and resources were dedicated to the defense of the frontier. Being able to finally see some real development feels like we're finally having our long vigil pay off. I can see that being a major factor going into our differences in attitude," Frian said. "Still, I believe what I mentioned remains relevant. It may be even more so as you're at the beginning of a new chapter for your house. You have the opportunity to learn from the Empire's mistakes, so to speak." "I'm certainly interested in hearing what you have to say once we've finished our tour," Ludmilla said. "Where are we going now?" Dimeo asked from the seat behind them. "We are crossing the dam to visit the human agricultural developments," Ludmilla answered. "I have roughly 1,500 human subjects living on the terraces above the lake's western shore." I've noticed that you tend to stress whether something is human or not, Frian said. It's mostly for your sake, Ludmilla said. The locals know who lives where, so there's no need to differentiate between the various areas of my territory. The carriage accelerated as they left the Citadel district and entered a long stretch of perfectly straight road. On the northern side was the lake west of the harbour, on the other, a precipitous drop. Freya eyed the latter nervously, a queasy feeling stirring her stomach. Is this the dam you mentioned? Rangobart asked. This is it, Ludmilla replied. But, how large is this thing? It's 2 kilometers long and 20 meters high, Ludmilla said. Building it this way allowed us to ease the grade of the route leading to the main road on the other side. The top of the dam is 50 meters thick, while the base is 10 times that. Is this some construct left behind by an ancient civilization? No, it was raised after the lizardman colonists arrived from the Great Lake in the Great Forest of Tob. The Great Lake must not seem so great to those lizardmen anymore. According to High Chieftain Shasha, the Great Lake covered an average area of 20 square kilometers. The lake in Warden's Vale must have been well over 10 times the size. So this dam was constructed to create the lake for the lizardmen to live in? Rangobart asked. The entire vale was reshaped for human habitation, Ludmilla answered. Our lizardmen were an unexpected addition, but they conveniently occupied space that wasn't inhabited by humans. They brought some new industries and a population of druids, as well, and they're already proving to be a beneficial addition. Was Warden's Vale terraformed using the same magic that shaped the foundations of Corlin Harbour? Freyan asked. Yes. Freyan stared mutely out of her window at the waters stretching beyond the northern horizon. Dams weren't an alien concept to the Empire, but the Empire didn't have any remotely near the size of the one they were currently traveling on. Small dams were usually built to power mills and redirect water, not create huge lakes. Is that a mill on the western end? Rangobart pointed over their shoulders to the front window. Yes, Ludmilla replied. It ended up being far more powerful than expected, but it runs off of the same principles as any other watermill. Access to dwarven steel allowed us to house the wheel in a pipe at the bottom of the dam to turn the shaft. We're trying to figure out what to do with all of the excess power. It goes through timber, stone, grain, and whatever else we throw at it with astonishing speed. They zipped by the massive mill and its mostly empty cargo yards past the western end of the dam. The road turned north into a gentle slope that scaled the hillside through an avenue formed out of sparse windbreaks. Why not increase the rate of land clearance if that's the case? Rangobart asked. Aside from a few minor projects, Ludmilla answered, Warden's Vale has already reached the extent of its intended land clearance. It has? Are these highlands unsuited for agricultural development? No, the land above the Vale was once farmland, as well. When the houses that once ruled there failed, the wilderness reclaimed it. Then why not claim it back? Dimir asked. There are a few reasons, Ludmilla said. The first is that I felt it wasn't necessary. This also happens to be in line with the will of my ancestors. Secondly, most of the capital duchy has been set aside for human habitation and my territory has more subjects belonging to other races than it has humans. The current total population of humans in all of my territories combined is less than 3,000. That's less than a tenth of the total population of citizens, at least as far as the Elder Liches can count. Most of my subjects are happy with their land as it is. I knew that frontier nobles tended to have extensive territories compared to their inland peers, Freyan said, but I haven't seen anything other than humans and undead yet. There were the plants. And the plants. That begs the question of your territory's size. In response, Ludmilla reached into the satchel at her waist. I suppose the maps that the Empire has access to don't really do anything to represent the borders of my fief, she said. Ludmilla pulled out a large scroll and unfurled it over her lap, revealing an intricately detailed map. As detailed as it was, someone saw fit to mark additional details upon it. This can't be right. The map displayed the southern duchy of Irantal, ending at the border of the slain theocracy. Freyan's eyes went back and forth between the map's features and the measure provided in the corner. Why is everything so big? Dimir asked. Irantal was always something like a frontier duchy, Ludmilla said. It never had the tight organization of the Heartlands. That's just a bit of an understatement, Freyan said. Wagner County stretched from Irantal to the imperial border, which meant that it was also large enough to cover most of the land between the imperial border and Angelfort. Corlin County was half again as large as Wagner County and occupied an area equivalent to Gushman Duchy. Ludmilla's barony was large enough to swallow both twice over. It looked like it was about half the land area of the Duchy of Eranthal. Some nobles exaggerated the size of their territories to make them seem more important or to support territorial claims. Ludmilla was clearly not such a person, however.
I assume it wasn't always this large, Frian said.
Upon the annexation of Eranthal, Ludmilla told them, House Saradnik's territory was only Warden's Vale.
That was the limit of our power projection.
The Sorceress Kingdom's ability to project power is far greater, and I was the only noble with the legal right to expand the borders. At first, I only reclaimed the old frontier border. Then, a goblin army showed up and threatened to invade us from the south. That campaign ended with me taking the upper reaches. In recent months, I took the western side of the mountains here to connect to the Theocracy's river transportation network and the Great Forest of Ivasha further south. There should be a functional port on that river by this spring.
And now you have a barony the size of a mark, Frian said.
Well, it would be a march in Riesties.
I assume that the Sorceress Kingdom will name things accordingly.
You know, I've come to realize that you have quite the sadistic streak. Are you in reality hiding behind one of your baronial titles just to see how people behave around a minor noble? Are you and Wagner just waiting for some annoying count to dig themselves a deep enough grave to have you say surprise, I'm actually a Marchioness?
Lady Zaradnik has always had a talent for understating things, Rangobart said. Even more so than our martial nobles. I'm surprised that you only recently noticed.
It was probably because Ludmilla's friends were more than happy to make up for her highly reserved behavior. At times, her presence could vanish entirely without Frian noticing.
It's my only title, so no, Ludmilla said. Posing as one of my lower titles would be in extremely poor taste. At least that's something normal about her. A noble was technically all of their titles, but they usually styled themselves using the most prominent one.
In that case, Frian asked, why haven't you been promoted yet?
The qualifications for promotion are different in the Sorceress Kingdom, Ludmilla answered. Corlin was promoted to Countess upon being granted the Riverlands. The reason behind her promotion was that her old title wasn't in line with her expanded domain. I reclaimed the old frontier after that, but nothing happened. Then Wagner was granted her new lands, which are roughly the size of the old frontier that I reclaimed.
So titles are tied to land development or economic contribution?
That's the assumption.
Assumption?
Why not ask?
It's not important, Ludmilla shrugged. The royal court will promote me whenever they see fit to do so, and remaining a baroness doesn't affect my ability to carry out my duties. Lady Shiltir doesn't care much for human titles, so Claro suspects that the promotion will come whenever the Prime Minister is annoyed enough about something where having a Marchioness on hand would be useful.
How do I even respond to that?
In the Empire, nobles fought for every advantage they could gain. Clara, Leanne, and Florine had similar sensibilities, making Ludmilla the odd one out. She did things because she felt like it and accepted things for what they were, yet, it was evident she had ambitions that drove her. One would think that she would do everything possible to achieve those ambitions, but no behavior to that effect ever manifested. Ludmilla Zaradnik was simply an enigma that common sense didn't seem to apply to. A strange object sticking out over the surroundings grew on the horizon, quickly resolving into some sort of fort. It was roughly the size of a town with a small tower near its center. Frian's lips turned downwards slightly when she saw that it was cut in half. Did you find this rock and decide to build on top of it? Frian asked.
No, Ludmilla answered, we raised this rock and built on top of it.
It looks extremely defensible, Rangobart said.
I've noticed that you've influenced many things in that direction.
This is the earliest one, Ludmilla said.
Well, it used to be.
It was partially destroyed a few days before Frian arrived.
Partially destroyed?
Was it attacked by a dragon?
No, it was subjected to some structural tests. We wanted to see how hard it would be to shake everything apart.
Is this area prone to earthquakes?
Not in my recollection, Ludmilla replied.
Only a few buildings collapsed before we decided that it was too mana inefficient to destroy the village in that manner.
What happened to the villagers?
They watched from the other side of the village square. Area of effect spells only produce their associated phenomena within their radius, yes?
It was quite surreal to watch.
Frianne looked up for signs of damage to the walls, but she couldn't make anything out beyond the fact that she was looking at a stone wall. So you have some homeless people now?
No. Buildings are destroyed and rebuilt in the villages, too.
The buildings in this village were due to be dismantled anyway. Additionally, we were able to widen the village's foundations a bit and implement some design changes to the sewer system. The sheer amount of labor consumed by the strange practices in Warden's Vale would surely drive any administrator or bureaucrat in the Empire mad.
Frianne wasn't sure whether she would escape unscathed.
Their carriage slowed as it approached the town-sized fortress village and entered via a ramp that branched off from the road cutting through it. They rolled into a rather normal-looking square and parked in front of the tower-like structure overlooking the surroundings. There weren't any structures like this in the harbor village, Frianne noted.
We call it a light tower, Ludmilla said. Every farming village has one.
It functions as a combination administrative center, post office, mage tower, and government warehouse.
A mage tower? How many mages dwell here?
About 10% of the village population is composed of arcane casters, Ludmilla said. Mostly children we've identified with arcane potential and enrolled as apprentices. They work in the morning and attend classes in the afternoon. It's close to lunch right now, however, so we might be able to catch them doing something. They disembarked from the carriage and Frianne exchanged looks with Dimir and Rangobart as Ludmilla padded into the front door of the light tower. The Death Knight's standing guard seemed to pay her absolutely no mind.
Oh, Ludmilla said, looks like they're at it.
Frianne followed Ludmilla inside, finding a group of children eating lunch around some tables in the office lobby. The tables not only had their meals, but dozens of tiles scattered upon them. Each child had a line of tiles placed in front of them and they seemed to be taking turns claiming the loose tiles for themselves. For some reason, an elder lich was watching them while taking notes.
What are they doing?
Frianne asked.
Playing a game called X's, Ludmilla answered.
Have you heard of it?
Dimir has.
Dimir raised her hand. It was something I played at Nemel's house. Do you still know how to play? Ludmilla asked.
You can join them if you'd like.
I forgot how, Dimir said. I played it all the time as a kid with Nemel and Arch until my parents told me to stop wasting my time and study instead. Unlike the children of great houses, scions of minor ones living in the city were quite mobile and mingled with one another readily. Frianne, on the other hand, could only interact with those her parents approved of, which was barely anyone her age, so she was often jealous of the other children's freedom. You wanted to show this game to us, Frianne said. Why is that? Miss Gran introduced Axis to Warden's Vale, Ludmilla replied. I was hoping you would be familiar with it. Frianne looked at Rangobart. Rangobart shook his head. As Dimir mentioned, Rangobart said, most scions didn't have time to waste with games. Every hour at play was an hour one lost to their competition. I see, Ludmilla said. How unfortunate.
Why do you say that?
Frianne asked. Axis is a game through which anyone can learn about the elemental axis, Ludmilla said. I figured it was something like the many games and songs from my village that taught children critical skills and information. Such as?
Let's see.
Hide and seek showed people where the best places to conceal themselves during a raid were and how to avoid detection. We had songs that taught us what was safe to forage from the forest and what wasn't. Goblin Raid taught us how to defend ourselves as a group, while Ogre Ball showed us how we could gang up on single powerful opponents with ranged weaponry. You didn't have anything similar? Frianne, Dimir, and Rangobart shook their heads. Frontier folk were truly built differently from the ground up. So you're promoting this game to help your subjects learn about the elemental axis, Frianne said. To what end? It seems like essential basic knowledge, Ludmilla replied, especially with the direction my fief is taking. Did non-casters need to know about such things? She supposed that there were a few vocations where it would come in handy, such as ones that brought individuals into combat with mystical opponents. How a farmer or tailor would benefit from it, however, she couldn't figure out. Is the elemental axis being taught in your schools, as well? Frianne asked. It is, Ludmilla nodded. This game seems to do most of the work, though, so it allows our teachers to use the time saved to focus on other subjects.
I still don't understand why you place so much importance on it, Frian said. It seems like a substantial investment for something that is at best a suggestion as to how the primal forces of the world are configured in relation to one another. The unified mana theory that Master Linez is proposing is still in the nascent stages of exploration, yet you seem convinced that it's valid and frame your observations according to them. It's a colossal leap of faith to believe in these supposed primal energies that we cannot even see. The only plausible reason she could think of that could back their investment in the theory was that it was ancient wisdom shared with them by the Sorcerer King or one of his cadres. Maybe they were testing what humans would do with the knowledge or setting some inscrutable plan into motion. I suppose it's something that I should investigate, or maybe that's part of the plan? How did you identify so many children capable of casting arcane magic, anyway? Rangobart asked. We have a talent holder who can gauge the magical potential of an individual, Ludmilla answered. It doesn't work all the time, but, over the course of days and weeks, it will eventually activate. Every time we identify a child, I discuss their options with them and their families. How do they decide if their child should learn magic? If it were up to Frian, she would have every child with arcane aptitude do so. Fluda Paradine had a powerful talent similar to the one that Ludmilla described, except it worked at will. Even so, he only took interest in those with the greatest potential, seeing anything less as dross. This amounted to an infuriating waste, but Frian had no say in how the ministry conducted its affairs at the time. Several factors are weighed, Ludmilla said. The first is the child's vocational aptitude in their family's trade. If it is exceptional, then we encourage them to keep pursuing it. If it isn't, then arcane studies offers them a promising avenue to a different trade with extremely high demand. Of course, if the child displays extraordinary arcane potential and only middling aptitude in their family trade, we encourage them to pursue arcane studies. Frian shifted uncomfortably at the clear influence of the faith of the Six in Ludmilla's decision-making process. It was her domain to rule as she saw fit, but the superstitious element to Ludmilla's otherwise level-headed rationality made it all the more disturbing. I suppose that you encourage spares to take up magic, if possible. Within reason, Ludmilla said. We still need to keep a diverse selection of strong bloodlines, and it isn't as if the harbor only needs magic casters. Overall, however, the system that I've implemented here endeavors to ensure that everyone has a basic education, and spares that go to the harbor will always find that they have a place as productive members of society. It's far better than the old system where spares were nothing more than, well, spares. In Warden's Vale, there is a real investment in every child to ensure that they can live a dignified life as adults, and I hope to eventually be able to create a similar life for all of my subjects. You mean to say that you'll have the different races under your rule live in the same settlements? Frian asked. That's their choice, but I will try to facilitate them however I can. Certain races prefer certain conditions, so it would be wrong to try and make them live in dwellings designed for humans. Places like this village will likely retain their human populations, though individuals of other races will still visit and conduct business. How do I even report this? If one were to describe Ludmilla's policies, the programs that attempted to carry them out, and their eventual goal, the Imperial Court Council would dismiss it all as the whimsical foolishness of an empty-headed idealist. Yet, by all appearances, Ludmilla was well on her way to achieving her objectives. If you don't mind, Frian said, can you tell us how it's possible to afford everything that you've implemented here? You must understand that, in the minds of most, everything you've shown us is absolutely impossible for a mostly undeveloped fief on the fringes of civilization. Never mind that, it would be impossible for a fully developed fief in the Imperial Heartland. I intend to, Ludmilla said. We'll be spending all day on the western bank of the lake, where you'll see many of the different mechanisms that you've only heard described working in practice. Hopefully, I'll be able to make a convincing case as to how you might be able to approach your own territorial development.